I really didn't want to have to make this video, but there's some shit we need to talk about. Welcome everyone to The Hungry Heathen. Now, I'm sure as most of you can tell, if you have eyes, we're not in our kitchen like we usually are when we make a video. This week we are in my meditation room, my altar room. Lately, as I scroll through social media, TikTok mostly, I see a lot of hate, a lot of disgusting things being said that shouldn't be said. A lot of racism, a lot of bigotry, and a lot of sexism within my faith. As a strong supporter of the Declaration of Deeds and Declaration 127, both of which I will link below, it is my duty to use my voice, no matter how small of a creator I am, to call out misdeeds as I see them. This video is going to ruffle some feathers, at minimum. And I'm sure it's going to piss off a lot of pretend heathens. I know I'm simply a small creator, but I'm hoping that this video finds the people it needs. And I'm hoping that other creators will join in as well, so even though a creator is small, we can garner one mighty voice. The first topic that I would like to touch on is being transgender. And I see it all the time. You cannot be one of us because you're trans. Not only are those that are thinking this way inherently wrong, but it also goes against a lot of the lore. For example, we'll start with a story. The fortification of Asgard. Anyone who's read the Eddas knows of the fortification of Asgard, where a giant shows up one day offering to build a wall for the gods in 1 year's time in exchange for Freya, the sun, and the moon. And as he gets closer to that 1 year mark, the gods realize that he's going to meet his deadline, and they're going to be without Freya and living in total darkness. The gods in this story have to come up with a plan, but no one can seem to come up with something. One day, while out gathering stones for the wall, the giant calls to his horse, Sverdolfari. He doesn't come. He calls a second time and sees Sverdolfari in the field chasing a chestnut mare. A brilliant chestnut mare, who leads him off into the woods, thus leaving the giant to drag the stones back to Asgard himself, putting him well behind schedule. The gods take note of this when he arrives and begin to celebrate because, well, now they don't have to get rid of Freya, the sun or the moon. Noticeably absent from this, however, is Loki, who sometime later walks back into Asgard with a young colt with 8 legs in tow. This young colt became Odin's mount we know as Sleipnir. This is one example of not only gender bending, but species bending as well. The next story, Thrymskiva, the theft of the hammer. This is another story anyone who's read the Eddas should know. Thor awakes one day to find Mjolnir missing. Loki travels to Jotunheim, finds out the giant Thrym has Mjolnir and will not give it back unless he is wed to Freya. Loki returns and gives the news to the gods. Heimdall comes up with the idea of having Thor dress as a bride, dress as Freya, wearing keys and her necklace, and going into Jotunheim and marrying Thrym under the guise of reacquiring Mjolnir. Thor, the everly masculine deity, declines this idea and says, I'm not wearing women's clothes. The gods will think me, for lack of a better term, a sissy. Loki points out to Thor, says that if we don't do this, we do not get Mjolnir back. The Jotun are going to take over Asgard anyway. Thor reluctantly agrees. And in stanza 20 of this very saga, Loki is quoted as saying, Now I shall go as your serving woman. The two of us shall travel to Jotunheim as man and woman. Throughout the saga, Thor is often referred to as Odin's son, the tough-minded fighter, and in another translation as Sif's mate, whereas Loki is referred to as the clever bridesmaid. The language of this alone, Thor holds on to his masculine characteristics, whereas Loki becomes feminine. Thor is wearing a costume. Loki is simply presenting as herself. This is another shining example of transgender in our sagas. But Loki is not the only god who practices the ability to shapeshift and gender bend. Odin practiced Sether. He was taught Sether by Freya in the Ynglinga saga, a magic that allowed him to commune with the dead, but was also seen as very, very feminine, and earned Odin the title of Ergi in this saga. There's also a figure of Odin from the 10th century that shows him wearing a gown, an apron, beads, and a cloak. The same figure also has one eye and two ravens perched upon it. Obvious signs of Odin. There have been several burial sites found of men wearing feminine items, more often than not believed to be practitioners of this very same magic that Odin held. Sether, the feminine magic that induces ecstasy. Skati, the Jotun who became an Asgardian, who is worshipped as the goddess of the hunt, the huntress herself, is sometimes seen as more masculine than feminine, given the role she plays. There are multiple instances of women stepping into men's roles as skalds, predominantly seen as male practice. Women stepping into the positions of warriors. There was one found recently in Norway. To say that you cannot be transgender in Norse pagan goes against the very obvious examples of the same gods that we worship, gender bending themselves. It goes against the sagas. It goes against archaeological finds. The next point I see a lot of. You can't be gay in Norse pagan. This also is very much untrue. According to a paper written to Fordham University by Ganora Halakarva, the Norse did not see homosexuality as wrong, they didn't see it as evil, and they didn't see it as going against nature. However, to be the submissive partner was often seen as cowardly and earned you the title of Ergi. But this was the thinking of a society that relied on the values of leadership and radical self-reliance. So to be seen as a submissive partner was often thought that you were allowing the other one to think for you. It was often also said that two male friends should not have penetrative sex with each other because it was seen as betrayal to one for emasculating him. However, there are multiple instances of the same Vikings that many of the people who think this way worship and scream victory or Valhalla about. Many instances of these same Vikings emasculating men on their raids by penetrating them. Yes, you heard me correctly. The same horn-clanking, mead-drinking Vikings that all of the hyper-masculine people celebrate often penetrated other men in societies they conquered to emasculate them and show themselves as dominant. Now, homosexuality was also not very stigmatized after you had married and had children because it was seen as though you had fulfilled your duty to propagate your bloodline. Also, men who were unable to produce children because they were infertile were often not held to the same standards because they simply lacked the ability to produce children. Touching on this subject also, there is no reports as to whether or not fellatio between two men was seen as frowned upon. In fact, it's also said that as long as you were married and had children, your sexual partners afterwards didn't matter. Nobody cared. And this brings me to a story, a saga, of Aron and Asmund. Aron and Asmund are two warriors. Asmund is lost in the woods. Aron finds Asmund and saves his life. And while Asmund is telling the story, he describes Aron as very handsome. In fact, the most handsomest of men he's ever seen. The two then, at that same moment, decide to make a blood oath to each other. So they open a vein and mix their blood together. The blood oath is that they will share half of all possessions with the other. And that should one die before the other, the living one will spend 3 days in the tomb with him. During this, Aron's kingdom is attacked by raiders and his father is killed. Aron and Asmund sail home with Aron's men, and they attack the raiders. They kill the raiders and avenge Aron's father, establishing that they are both very capable warriors. And then right there on the spot, Aron declares the oath that he and Asmund have swore to all of the townspeople and makes Asmund his co-king. Aron falls ill and dies. Asmund spends his 3 days in the tomb with Aron. And upon leaving the tomb, he returns to town. And the townspeople shun Asmund. They don't see him in any way other than ergi, lending some truth to the fact that this was a gay relationship and that Asmund was most likely the submissive one. Sometime later, Aron's uncles show up, berserker uncles. Aron's men stand by Asmund's side and fight against him, but the townspeople do not, allowing Aron's men to be killed and Asmund to be captured. Aron's uncles then plan the next day to execute Asmund on Aron's burial mound in the name of Odin. Asmund escapes and kills the uncles, again establishing himself as a capable warrior. Sometime later, Aron's brother Harad arrives at the port. Asmund throws himself to Harad's mercy, And Herod makes Asmund aware that he knows of the agreement between him and his brother. And he looks at Asmund through a different lens than Arn did in this story. Instead of making a blood pact, Herod simply just gives Asmund some men, some ships, and permission to go raiding, but also makes note that Asmund is welcome back to the kingdom anytime he so shall wish. This is a depiction of Herod seeing Asmund as someone who is of great importance in his brother's life. Later in the story, Asmund does marry a woman who is the sister of his new sworn blood brother, Eagle the One-Handed. Now, there is no comparison between his relationship with Arn versus his relationship with Eagle. But on his wedding day, Herod is invited and shows up. Asmund gifts Herod several important magical items, showing that his relationship with Arn was so important to him that he wanted to continue the bond with Arn's brother and keep that familial tie. Now, there is another version of this. Saxo Grammaticus writes about it in History of the Danes, Book 5. The death pact in this one, however, is not 3 days. It's forever. And in this, Saxo is quoted as writing, "He and the king's son, which after living together for a short period of time, confirmed their friendship had been cultivated by making the very vow that he who shall live longer will be entombed with his dead companion. So strong was their loving fellowship that neither proposed to prolong his days when the other had been snatched away by fate." Let's recap. Arn makes Asmund his co-king. Arn, in the one version, spends 3 days in the grave. Asmund spends 3 days in the grave in the one version with Arn. Upon leaving the grave, Asmund is seen as Ergi, Arn's uncles. Try to execute him on Arn's grave in the name of Odin. Saxo's version, choosing to die when the other does. This is more than just a friendship. This is a loving relationship between two men. And when you look at it from the view other than that of a cis, straight white male, it's not hard to see. Also, to say that homosexuality didn't happen in the Norse is foolish. There's reports of it happening in the Greeks, the Romans, the Spartans, the warrior race, the Spartans. All have known cases of homosexuality. They were a society just like the Norse. To say that the Norse didn't have homosexuality because you have a hyper-masculine idea of Vikings is wrong and foolish, and it doesn't bode well in antiquity or history. So, telling someone they can't be a Norse pagan, or a heathen, for that matter, because they're gay is showing your own bias. Nothing more. Moving on. This one really gets me. This is a religion that is ancestral, and only white people can follow it. I'm going to let that sink in for a minute. This is the most obscene form of spiritual racism in any of the religions that I have seen. Telling someone they can't follow a religion because of their skin color is foolish. And it does not bode well with history. The Vikings didn't stay in Scandinavia. They didn't stay in one place. There are reports of them traveling all over. And there are familial graves in places such as Estonia, Scotland, England, Morocco, that all show that this was not the case, that they did in fact travel far and wide. The Vikings used the Baltic Sea and Russian rivers to go as far as Constantinople, modern-day Ukraine. They were noted as offering protection and bodyguards to Byzantine emperors. There's also reports of them using Mediterranean trade routes to take them to North Africa. If you've watched the show Vikings in any capacity and you've seen the episode where they go to Africa, it's historically accurate, although it's a TV show. So, them going to Africa was the accurate part. There are reports, there's a recorded instance of Vikings landing in Morocco. In 859, the Vikings were removed from Spain by the Andalusians, Arab and black descent. And they sailed and landed in Morocco, where they stayed until the 860s. And they raided again, fighting the Berber kings, further increasing the likelihood of their trading in North Africa. There are many genealogical studies that show that Scandinavian DNA wasn't all that high in Scandinavia. Some were Southern European and Scandinavian. Some were Sami, the indigenous tribe, Sami, and Scandinavian or European. In fact, many of the genealogical studies exhibit a lot more non-Scandinavian DNA than Scandinavian DNA. And this brings us to another character in history. Queen Ljufvina, Bjorma's daughter. Ljufvina was a noblewoman from the Sikirtia tribe, a Mongolian tribe in Siberia. They resided on the coast along the eastern border in what is known as Bjarmeland. Ljufvina and her tribe were often described by 16th century writing as the other and the Black Samoyeds. Ljufvina was married to King Hjorhalfsson of Avansnes when he traveled to her land to go walrus hunting. Ljufvina's father saw fit to marry her to him, as was custom in the day, to continue a trading relationship and a walrus hunting relationship with the king. The king and queen had two twin sons. The most renowned of them was Geirmund the Black-Skinned, who, while never ruling as king, was often touted as being a great sea king and an ally to the kings of Dublin. Geirmund settled in Iceland, earning himself the reputation of the greatest of all settlers in Iceland. The king and queen themselves attended King Harald Fairhair's Althing after consolidating Norway into one kingdom. There they decided that it was better if they left the kingdom peacefully than live under the rule of Harald, settling in Jorvik, which is modern-day York. This again goes to prove that the aforementioned sentiments in antiquity and history are untrue and are nothing more than bias put in place today. The last point that I would like to touch on. Women cannot wear the Mjolnir in this faith. This very symbol of our faith. Women should not be allowed to wear it. As a heathen. We often wear Mjolnir to represent our faith. Some of us wear it for strength and protection. I know there are times when that's why I wear it. To say that you can't wear it based entirely on your gender is a whole new series of spiritual gatekeeping that borders sexism. It is sexism in its raw form. Telling a woman that she cannot wear a symbol of our faith while practicing this very faith because of her gender is spiritual gatekeeping. But it also doesn't lend itself in antiquity and history either. These pendants were worn by the North Germanic people. These are based off of those very pendants worn by those in North Germania. They became popular during the conversion period among heathens. Some think as a way of rebellion to the cross, and others as a way for us to show ourselves to others in a land coming predominantly Christianized. There are many cases of Mjolnir being found in cinerary urns in women's graves. They are hammer rings, which is an iron ring that went around the wrist and had multiple hammers on it. There's one case in Hilde Stryn, Norway, of a female cremation boat being found in a burial mound wearing one of these rings. Not only did women wear the Mjolnir in antiquity, but so far as we found, more women wore the Mjolnir than men. To quote a YouTuber that I follow, and I've learned a myriad of things from, a fellow creator, Ocean Keltoy, the hammer is a symbol of protection and strength. It was a sacred weapon of Thor, protector of humanity. Wearing the hammer would be to not only inherit, but to embody that. And when we wear our Mjolnir, we should live up to it. Thor, the protector of all of humanity, not straight white humanity, not gender binary humanity, all of humanity. Thor was a friend of humanity. And I'm going to expand further on this by saying that if you practice this faith, if you read the lore, you do your best to live up to the values, you have every right to wear this hammer. Those that do not are the ones who think exactly like those that have forced me to make this video. The ones who do not deserve to wear this hammer are those that think that this is a religion only for straight, white, cisgender people. Those people need to remove their hammer, and not only remove their hammer, but they need to hang their heads in shame. Especially if those very people hold praxis with Odin, the god of wisdom, the Allfather, the seeker of knowledge. Because it's become incredibly evident by thinking this way that they have lacked the ability to read any of the lore and are going simply off of what they've seen on TV or anything of the like. Those very people who lack the ability to educate themselves and would rather sit in their own bigotry and hatred should hang their heads in shame, because they do not deserve to wear this hammer. They do not deserve to follow this path. I'm going to post another video. It could be later today, it could be tomorrow, but I'm going to post another video. I would like to welcome all of you that have been affected by the hatred that those who claim to be a part of this community have set forth to you. This video is going to be a ritual for those of you that need it. You're welcome to join. You're welcome to join in at home. It's going to be recorded so you can rewatch it whenever you feel the need. I would like to welcome those of you into my own personal hearth cult. And before I end this video, I would like to call on all creators, big and small, to stand with me and protect the very people that have been affected by this hatred, to welcome them in with loving arms, to offer a guiding hand to show them the way. We need to raise our shields and raise our voices, so those that think that they have won based in their bias realize just how quiet they actually are. We need to combine our shields. We are one mighty voice, and we will drown out the hatred that those with bigotry in this community are projecting forth. On that note, I am the Hungry Heathen. I will see you next time.